and sell it anywhere else in the world. There's no design paradigm. To solve the plastic packaging problem, we need to effectively rethink the entire system. From one which is linear, i.e. take, make, dispose, to one where it can be recovered and fed back into the economy as a valuable plastic material, or one where it is biobenign and it can enter the environment. The ultimate goal of the new plastics economy is to design an economy where plastic packaging never becomes waste. And to do that, we need every single player in the chain to change the way that they do things.
But marine pollution comes in many forms. Industrial, agricultural, and urban waste also sweep into the sea, fueling explosions of algae that rob marine ecosystems of the oxygen they need to survive. With sustained pollution, these areas become dead zones, which already exist in more than 400 locations across the globe. But nutrient pollution can be managed through change in major contributing systems like agriculture.
If you eat, you're involved in agriculture. So it's a problem that all of us have to work together to solve. Soil health is critical for water quality. It's the first thing we have to focus on. Here on the farm, organic matter is the key thing that we try to improve. The more organic matter you have in the soil, the better the soil can hold on to nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen. Organic matter keeps it from leaching out of the soil. It grabs onto it, and that's good for the farmer, but it's also good for water quality in the bay. For any farmer to change their system is tricky, and it takes a lot of work. I think all farmers want to. It's learning different processes, practices that allow you to do it effectively. That becomes a key.
Okay, an amazing evening to each and everyone joining across different countries in Africa. Good evening. I believe we are all in the evening period. It's so good to have you on this call again this week. That's the second series of the Oceanovation African program. And I want to say congratulations to each and everyone once again. My name is Emmanuel Olaoluoyo. You can call me the Development Catalyst, and I will be your moderator for today's workshop. And this evening, we are going to this session right away. Guest speaker in our midst who is going to be facilitating and leading us into this session. And we are blessed to have an industry expert in line to blue economy activities in person of Madam Elizabeth Francis, who is the Director of Blue Carbon Content Development at Fair Carbon, where she leads efforts to provide comprehensive guidance for high-quality blue carbon project development in the voluntary carbon market. Our work also includes creating policy frameworks to facilitate blue carbon project development that benefits the environment, community, and biodiversity. Beyond her role at Fair Carbon, Elizabeth actively contributes to the field of international law regarding blue carbon and explores the synergies to facilitate the alignment of national policies with multiple international climate change and sustainable development goals. And this evening, we are blessed to have Madam Elizabeth in our midst. Good evening, Elizabeth. It's so good to have you join us in the session. And thank you for taking your time to lead the session on blue carbon. And we are here to learn further and also to get further information and get engaged with you. Thank you so much for honoring our invitation. Thank you, and you can get to start your session now.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that very kind introduction, and thank you for having me. I'm very excited to talk about this topic. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if I can. Let's see. Can everybody potentially see this?
Okay, perfect. We
yes.
can see clearly.
Okay. All right, as was introduced, my name is Elizabeth Francis. I'm the Director of Blue Carbon Content Development at Fair Carbon. So our objective is to provide free and open access resources, guidance, and tools for blue carbon projects. And today I'm going to be here to talk to you about blue carbon and carbon markets as a mechanism to store or protect, conserve, and restore ocean and coastal ecosystems. So just a quick overview of what I'm going to go through. First, I'll talk about what blue carbon is generally, the types that I'm talking about. Then we'll dive into what is a blue carbon credit, how does the process work, look at some of the case studies that we've had so far, and then take an in-depth assessment of what some of the challenges are to potential projects. And I'll try to leave some extra room for everyone to ask questions. I do encourage you to write down questions as I go through all this information, because it is a lot and I can't cover everything in complete detail. So I do encourage your questions at the end. So first of all, what is blue carbon? And I'm wondering if people can put in the chat what they think or know blue carbon, what is it? How would you define it? So if you could just take a second to write an answer in the chat, and I'll read some of them out. Hopefully.
Okay, or maybe someone wants to give a try and use the mic. Maybe you can just take one and
feel free to hop on.
Okay, so if you like to speak and answer a question, you can just raise your hand and you'll be given access to speak. However, you can also use the comment section and share your answer there.
All right, someone here said carbon stored in coasts and marine habitats. Anybody else want to give it a go? Well, I can say, okay, air found in oceans. Okay, I see a hand raised. Feel free to speak, Patrick.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I think blue carbon is carbon captured by the ocean.
Yes, yeah. So blue carbon is the carbon that is sequestered and stored by ocean and coastal ecosystems. So that can be any process within the coastline or within the open ocean that stores carbon in a long-term time frame. And when I say that, we typically mean that carbon stays locked away from the atmosphere for about 100 years or longer, if possible. So today, I'm going to be talking to you about one particular type of blue carbon, and that is coastal blue carbon. And so coastal blue carbon has about 3 ecosystems that are within this category, and that's mangroves, seagrasses, and salt marsh. So mangroves are the one that's most frequently talked about, and they store more carbon than normal terrestrial forests, despite covering significantly less than 1% of the planet's surface. And they're really efficient at storing carbon because they trap sediment within their roots, which you can see in this picture here. And those roots trap the sediment, which stores carbon, and it gets buried deep into the soil. They also store carbon within the trees themselves, although the majority of the carbon that we're talking about within mangroves is stored within the soil itself. So then the next ecosystem we have here are seagrasses, and they have actually a greater percentage of carbon storage than mangroves. They're more efficient. They store 2 times as much as terrestrial forests. And again, the majority of that carbon is stored within the sediment itself. And that can be up to 4 meters deep. So below the line that you see here with our turtle, and that can be thousands and thousands of years old. But they cover very, very small percentage of the Earth's surface. And in addition to that, unfortunately, they're not well mapped out in terms of where they are located and the extent and area covered, because they actually can move and migrate areas. So it's not well understood and mapped at where they're located. But there are some ongoing efforts, I think, to map that more efficiently. The next ecosystem we have is tidal salt marshes, so which is located, within the coastline and the ocean. So there's more fresh water and salt water in these ecosystems. And again, the majority of their carbon is stored within the soil, but they are also really excellent at filtering pollution from terrestrial sources, from mining activities, for example. And they actually, this is the same with mangroves, they actually can change where they are located and expand because of sea level rise. So there is the potential that with climate change, they could actually increase in area and we could have more carbon storage over time. So these ecosystems aren't just good at storing carbon. They also provide many, many benefits to communities, biodiversity, the ecosystem as a whole, as well as when done correctly, they can provide a lot of sustainable development opportunities for local communities. They also help us adapt to climate change, mitigate climate change, and are incredible hotspots for biodiversity, both on land and within the ocean. So with that, healthier mangrove ecosystems, for example, actually have higher fishing yields offshore. So fishermen do better when their mangroves are intact because a lot of marine species rely on these ecosystems for one part of their life cycle. They also provide lots of food sources for many communities and people. And a lot of local communities use mangroves, for example, as a source of fuel wood and heat throughout the year. So with that, they have this amazing potential to meet a lot of our sustainable development goals, depending on the project and the ecosystem and what objectives you want to get out of restoring some of these areas. So how can we kind of harness blue carbon as like an innovation and push things forward? And that is through what I work on, which is blue carbon credits. And what are blue carbon credits? Great question. It's very complicated, but essentially what it is taking a degraded habitat and restoring it. So if you look here on the right-hand side, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but this is a degraded ecosystem in the right-hand corner. There's nothing here. But then over time, if you restore the hydrology, plant more trees, over time, you have then down here at the bottom right-hand corner, a healthy, functioning ecosystem. And so how blue carbon credits work is you measure the amount of carbon that is stored going from this degraded state all the way to a healthy state. So ideally, more carbon is stored over time. And how this works is that when you're doing that restoration, if we look over here on this schematic here in the middle, the ecosystem is storing carbon, and they will sell a carbon credit to an individual or a company. Then they will use that to reduce their own emissions, and they pay the project for that carbon that was stored. And that money can then go into continuing to conserve and protect these really valuable ecosystems. So it's really an incentivization and financial mechanism to restore degraded habitats. And to do this, projects can do essentially two things, which is restoration or prevent any sort of degradation from happening in the first place. So where does this happen and how does it work? It happens in what we call carbon markets, and there's essentially two different types. The first is the voluntary carbon market, and that is where a project restores an ecosystem willingly, voluntarily, and sells that carbon that they've reduced to individuals or organizations who are also voluntarily trying to reduce their own emissions. And these are typically like small, one individual project, and they have to comply with the rules and regulations of the voluntary carbon market. And as a whole, the voluntary market is not regulated by one large international organization or body. So then we have the compliance market. And this is a system where it is nationally regulated, and companies and organizations are required, they have to reduce their emissions. So they do this partly by reducing their own, but also by buying carbon credits. And so with this, they have to buy credits from projects that are authorized by the national mechanism, and those projects have to follow the national compliance laws. So within this context, it is all regulated by a government, for example, a government agency or national governments. So projects can essentially earn the credits in either voluntary and compliance market by something called a carbon standard. And carbon standards create guidelines and criteria for projects to measure, report, and verify carbon emissions reductions. So essentially, they're like individual organizations that they have their own set of rules and requirements, and projects can select which standard they think is appropriate. And the real objective of having standards is to provide an underlying common framework for projects to measure carbon in the exact same way and to facilitate the trading of carbon credits, but making sure that's happening in a really transparent way so that everyone can see what's happening at the project level, how much carbon is being stored, how is it being stored, and why. So that's kind of how it works. But if the project cannot meet the carbon measurement criteria or other standard requirements, the project is not allowed to earn any carbon credits whatsoever. So there are two main bodies for blue carbon, I would say. that are applicable. There's the Verified Carbon Standard, or VERA VCS. They also have additional standards and certifications that a project can earn that verify the sustainable development like goals and objectives of a project, or that the project also provides environmental and biodiversity benefits to the local area. Then we have the Plan Vivo standard, and they obviously have their own carbon measurement requirements, but they also have very comprehensive requirements for all of their projects to have biodiversity, community, carbon, and environmental reporting. So it's not just about the carbon, it's also about everything else that is going on in the project area. And if it does not meet those really high quality benchmarks of, community involvement, participation, then the project cannot earn credits. So what unifies essentially these standards in all of the projects, regardless of which standard they pick, there are 4 requirements that all projects have to meet in order to earn carbon credits. So the first one is additionality. And essentially what that is saying is that the reductions or removals, the carbon reductions or removals, would not have been achieved without the project interventions and the funding that is coming from the carbon credits. So for example, if there's a project that is mandated to happen by the national government, that project cannot earn carbon credits because it would have happened anyway. So it really has to be a situation where the project does not have enough financing and cannot occur without the carbon credit finance. Hopefully that makes sense. It's a very complex topic, and I'm happy to answer any questions moving forward. There's also permanence, which is essentially stating that carbon has to be in the ecosystem well beyond the life of the project, so 100 years or longer. And then there's leakage, which is requiring that emissions do not occur somewhere else because of the project. An example of this could be a project preventing local communities from cutting down mangroves for fuel wood. And when they prevent the community from doing that, the community moves to a new area because they still need a source of fuel. And it has to come from somewhere, so they just move areas. And that would not be eligible under voluntary carbon market rules. There's then double counting, which is essentially saying that any credit that is produced by a project can't be counted by 2 people or 2 organizations. So a project can't sell a credit to Microsoft, for example, but also have it be counted by their national government. So it can only be counted once. So how do projects do all of this miraculous work? This is where things get a little technical, so apologies. But here is kind of the carbon accounting framework and methodology that all projects have to follow. So how they do the carbon accounting is by measuring the carbon at the ecosystem before they've done any sort of restoration work whatsoever. And so this is called baseline emissions. So that's this upper line right here. And what they're trying to do is, as a result of their interventions and planting more mangroves, restoring the hydrology, they then reduce the emissions coming from that ecosystem to the project emissions scenario, which is that bottom line right here. So the difference then between the two, so between the baseline emissions and the project emissions, is how many carbon credits a project can produce. So essentially a portion of that, regardless, must go into what's called the buffer pool, which is essentially setting aside a certain amount of credits in case something really disastrous happens to the project. So you don't want to sell all of your credits, because what if, you know, there's a tsunami or a hurricane that destroys part of your project site? You have then, through the buffer pool, in excess of credits so that you can have sold, you know, the credits, and you have some like left over, and you're not selling them all and they didn't occur because your project was damaged by a hurricane, which is also a bit complicated, and they've been changing the rules kind of around that works and how you calculate it recently. Okay, so one of the actually critical things before I move on is that to calculate the baseline scenario here, you have to have a lot of historic data and understanding of what's happened in that project site over the past 10 years or so, which can be a limitation for many projects that don't have that data and knowledge. So the process to earn credits, here's kind of an overall view. So initially, a project will develop a feasibility study to see if the project is worth doing. They will then get some funding and submit initial documentation to their selected carbon standard. They then have to go through this really fun process of being audited by an external body. So it's not only that they have to meet the requirements of the carbon standard, there also has to be another organization that verifies that all of that is real. And once they've gone through that verification process, which is yellow here, then they can start implementing the project activities and then earning credits after everything has been verified. So just kind of looking at a schematic of how this whole thing works. So the project is using the requirements of the carbon standard, and then there's this external body that is verifying that what the project is saying is actually happening. So they check the requirements of the carbon standard and you know, look at whether the project is meeting those. And then they look at whether the project is actually reducing, producing the carbon credits that they claim they are, which can be a very complex and time-consuming process, unfortunately. But then projects can then sell their credits, so they can either sell them directly to the person that wants to buy them, or they can sell them to what are called brokers. And essentially these groups tend to hold on to the credits and wait for their value to increase and then sell them like 5 or 6 years later. So that was a lot, but let's look at a real life example and a case study of what actually this looks like in implementation and in practice. But first, just to give a high level understanding, there are about 60 blue carbon projects on the market. However, unfortunately, most of them are under development, so not a lot of them are selling credits yet, but there's been a really, really big growth in projects within the past couple of years. This is a map that Fair Carbon created that shows all of the blue carbon projects that are on the voluntary carbon market. So if you're curious about any of the details, please feel free to go take a look. But let's dive into the first ever blue carbon project, which is Makoko Pamoja, which is located in Gazi Bay, Kenya. And as a result of this project, the carbon credit income has funded a lot of really beneficial community activities. So some of that's been just like local sustainable development initiatives, water and sanitation, education, health initiatives for women, environmental conservation activities, and this is what they call the triple win, which is winning for climate, communities, and biodiversity. So I have a quick video. Hopefully this will, I don't know if you can hear it or not. Can you hear that? Give a thumbs up. Yes.
No, we can't hear the audio.
You can.
We can see the video, but the
You
audio
can't hear it.
is not playing.
Okay. I don't know why that is. Let's see if I can share the video on YouTube. Maybe.
Yeah, that should work.
Yeah. Okay, let's try this then. Can you hear it now? Yes.
No.
Oh, that's so sad.
Can you share the link? Can you share the link with me? Let me see if I can pull it from here.
Yeah, oh wait, here's a share sound. Does that? Okay, let's try this real quick.
And that is exactly what is happening.
Did that work?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, great. Technical difficulties.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mangrove Conservation and Village Development Project in Gazi Bay on the south coast of Kenya. Makoko Pamoja means mangroves together. And that is exactly what is happening. Instead of cutting down mangroves, the villagers are protecting these blue forests. Makoko Pamoja is a model for mangrove villages around the world. It's the first community project to use the sale of biocarbon credits from the mangrove ecosystem to bring conservation and development together. The sale of biocarbon credits not only funds the conservation efforts, but also creates jobs and pays for access to clean water and education. Mangroves are an essential part of vital marine ecosystems. They provide a breeding ground for fish and a buffer between the land and the sea. They protect seagrass meadows and coral reefs from silting. And they're a natural defence against sea storms and coastal erosion. But mangroves are in rapid decline globally. Local communities and people from further afield enter the communal forests to cut mangrove poles for timber. In Kenya, this has resulted in the destruction of 20% of mangroves over the last 30 years. This loss has resulted in the decline of fish stocks. Since villagers get almost all of their protein from fish, this hits hard. Flooding from sea storms has also increased. Through Makoko Pamoja, the blue forests are now being protected and seen for their true value.
I've been chopping mangrove for 5 years, and I stopped after the coming of Makoko Pamoja and discover and realize the importance of Makoko Pamoja for the sake of the community development.
The project started in 2013, a joint initiative between the Gazi Bay villagers, volunteers from global NGOs and research institutions in Kenya and the UK. The project employs forest guards who are often based in a watchtower to deter cutting of the mangroves. Villagers go out to the 117 hectares of protected mangrove forest 4 times each year. This is to monitor growth and biodiversity in the forest. Trees are measured and key indicators of ecosystem health are checked, like crab numbers. Makoko Pamoja is also a reforestation project.
Our activity today is planting. So we take the plants which we kept in the nursery, we transport them or we migrate them from one place to another place.
The carbon benefits from protecting and planting mangroves are substantial. Not only do mangroves retain carbon in their own biomass, they also lock it into the marine muds. More than 1,500 tonnes of carbon per hectare is stored beneath the forests. That's more than 8 times that of forests on land. Local people now have long-term security of protein from viable fisheries. Crops are protected, and the coast is naturally defended against sea storms. The community decides how they want to spend the project income. Making sure each child has a school book has been an early priority, and the schools are now sending students onto high schools for the first time.
Mikoko Pamoja sincerely has done a lot to our school, especially, for example, when you go to performance. Last year, the school broke the records because of the books we received donation from Mikoko Pamoja.
Pumps funded by Mikoko Pamoja also provide clean drinking water for several hundred children in the 2 primary schools in Gazi and Makongeni. 4,500 people in the wider community also benefit from clean drinking water, and people no longer carry water from afar. Jobs have been created for 2 forest guards and 1 project coordinator. The vision for Mikoko Pamoja is to ensure enough support is found to keep the project developing and to roll out the project as a flagship for other Blue Forest villages in Kenya and elsewhere. The first replication of the project is already underway at Vanga Blue Forest, close to Tanzania. Part of future development will be to include the seagrass meadows in the ecosystem's carbon credits. Local people, volunteers, NGOs, research institutions and individuals are coming together around this amazing project, funding conservation and development through action on carbon footprints. Mikoko Pamoja biocarbon credits are available through the charities ACES and Plan Vivo.
All right. So that is just a small, taste of what some of these projects can do, and this is just the first one that has ever come about, which is pretty amazing. So let's share this again. Can everybody see this? Are we good? Yep, hopefully. Okay. So just a quick update on Mikoko Pamoja. As I understand, they are now expanding to seagrasses within the next year. So they should be earning additional carbon credits from both the mangroves and the seagrass. And they are starting some new local initiatives as well, as I've understood, and including a new community. So right now it's 2 communities, and they're expanding to another community to be a part of this project. So this is an example of how amazing and great and well-functioning they can be. But there are, unfortunately, a lot of challenges. And just kind of curious if anybody wants to enter in the chat or raise their hand if they want to take a guess or a stab at kind of what some of these challenges might be, whether it's social or, getting down into measuring. Please feel free to brainstorm. So if you want to enter in the chat some ideas that you have. Or just raise your hand.
Okay, we'd just like to confirm if anyone wants to use the comment section or you want to speak directly, you can raise your hand. You can just raise your hand while you be granted access to speak. Okay, I can see someone using the comment section already in line to the challenges that might likely be encountered in achieving such projects.
Yeah, so someone here says one of the challenges is accessing funding, which is absolutely spot on. Any other guesses? So starting the project and implementation, lack of materials, and I see we have a hand raised.
Okay, Supra, you can unmute your mic and speak.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I guess one of the biggest challenges just see majority of us and majority of people are not aware of how they can write the project and request for funding. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. I think we have one more hand raised.
Okay, Abdullah, you can unmute your mic and speak.
Okay. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity. Here in Nigeria, we face challenges in maintaining this type of project. 21 million trees, but they say that some they die of natural disasters. Some they, you know, in Nigeria they don't used to take care of that tree. That's one of the problems that we are facing here.
Yeah,
Hello?
absolutely.
Hello? Hello?
Okay, we can hear you. We can hear you, but there's you have a background noise. You have a chairman that is disturbing there. However, it's allowed. So you can also use the comment section. Do we like to have more people?
Yeah, why don't we do two more people and then I will read out what's in the chat.
Okay, all right. Can we have Jonathan from Nigeria? You can unmute your mic and speak.
Good evening.
Good evening, Jonathan.
Thank you for the knowledge. The major problem we may have in implementing this project is funding, because most of the communities rural communities in various states in Nigeria are affected by all this climate change, deforestation, and other things. So the community are willing to accept this kind of project, but funding will be the major challenge, because with the advocacy, sensitization, town hall meeting, this kind of project will be accepted and many people will support us to implement it. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, absolutely. Okay. Can we have Karim from Burkina Faso? Karim, you can unmute your mic and speak.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for the floor and the opportunity given. As we have said, the great problem in Africa and mostly in Burkina Faso is first the funding, and also the lack of training about those issues, because there are new issues, people are not aware about that. And mainly we have to educate and sensitize rural people about the issue, because if they are not sensitized, they will contribute to create problem to the climate, because most of them, they cut tree, they don't know what are the drawbacks of cutting trees. So they have to be sensitized. And if there are also funding to help them come out with some project so that we have a green environment. Thank you very much.
Okay. I think it can over to you now, Elizabeth.
Okay, great. Yeah, so some of the other ones in the chat, one is lack of government backing, limited knowledge about the blue economy, lack of information, lack of technical knowledge, and raising awareness and mobilizing local communities. And accessing funding it's here a lot, which is actually really great to see. So there are a lot of challenges, to say the least. So some of those are social, some of them are related to, measuring the carbon itself, as well as technical challenges. And then here we get to the lack of funding in the really high project costs, as well as some issues related to policy. So I think someone mentioned that in the chat, which actually tends to be typically overlooked, but is one of the major challenges to most projects. So diving into each of these, so let's take a look. The first is social. So a lot of projects don't really see communities as a central, requirement and component to include. However, they are the most important group to engage with, and they should be at the center of the project, making decisions, deciding where the money from the credits goes, and having like a democratic governance model for the project to make decisions in a really clear way for all community members to see. And with that as well, a lot of projects do not form, alternative livelihood options. So if communities rely on mangroves for subsistence living and for food, for fuel, and you take that resource away, you have to provide, an alternative. Like, what else can they use? What else can they do? So some projects have created beekeeping businesses. So they sell the mangrove honey to visiting people or online, or other activities. Like I think there's a jewelry making one. You can all sorts of options to bring in income that isn't related exclusively to cutting down the mangrove trees. So that's one of the issues, as well as I think people really feel that, unfortunately, it takes a lot of time to build trust in these communities. And that is the most fundamental thing that all projects should be doing first. And to build that trust, it takes time and effort and resources. And it also requires a lot of information and awareness raising and capacity building that needs to happen, so that people can understand what the objective of the project is and how it's going to benefit them, and why conserving and restoring these ecosystems is valuable. And that can take more than 5 years. So being patient, I think, is really, really critical for securing this piece. The next is the carbon measurements are very hard to do. And there's a lot of lack of data for some of these ecosystems. So this has led to kind of an interesting ongoing issue within carbon markets, is that people say that the ecosystem is more degraded than it is in reality, because that way they can earn more credits, right? So the difference between these two blue lines will be more. But it's also really expensive to measure. As I mentioned before, most of the carbon is in the soil. And so if you want to earn the most credits, you need to measure the soil carbon. And that can be very, very expensive. You have to send it to a lab to be calculated. That can be really expensive. There aren't very many labs around the world. And so locating one near the project site might be really difficult. So this has been a challenge for certain projects. The next is a lot of technical challenges. Projects you don't need to always plant mangroves. And this is really hard to understand, I think, because planting seems like such a great activity and is really amazing for community engagement and awareness. However, mangroves, if they're not growing in an area, there's a reason why. And you have to understand why they're not growing. And typically it might be because they're not receiving enough fresh water. So you have to restore some of the hydrology and the access to water first. So addressing certain issues within the ecosystem, maybe the salinity is too high, maybe there's pollution that's coming from a different source, like a mine or something like that, that is preventing mangroves from growing. And then that will facilitate the growth of the mangroves. But what happens is people plant in these really pretty nice lines that you can see here in this picture. Looks amazing, great for advertising and marketing. But a lot of the times, over 80% of the time, they're gonna die. So unfortunately, there's been a lot of effort spent on just planting. And unfortunately, planting in this way can lead to competition between the individual species, or a lot of them end up dying. And projects, because they're basing it on how many trees they're planting, think that they're going to earn more credits than they actually are in reality. And this goes back to a practice that personally at Fair Carbon we find to be the most essential way, which is community-based ecological mangrove restoration, which is essentially involving the community in the restoration activities, but also basing that restoration on ecological principles. So understanding what really is the root of the problem instead of just planting everywhere, even though it looks really nice. Then the next problem that a lot of you have very aptly touched on is project costs and financing. So one of the big problems is there's a really high upfront cost for these projects. So as I mentioned, with the social engagement and understanding, the baseline ecosystem, why aren't mangroves growing? That can cost thousands and thousands of dollars that a lot of projects do not have. In addition to that, to earn credits on the carbon market, there is a market entrance cost that can be quite large, depending on the standard that you pick. And even if you have secured some initial funding, there are also really high costs throughout the project that can be really high cost for, restoring the mangrove in total. So as I said, with the hydrology, you might have to get heavy equipment to dig new channels. That's really expensive. And that all requires time and resources. The other problem is that there's generally a pretty low price for carbon. So instead of, you earning $100 for every metric ton of carbon that you sell, it's much smaller. You can see in this graph here, sometimes it's around $3. And the highest one that we've seen for blue carbon is 35. And unfortunately, that just does not cover all of the costs associated with the project. So then this leads to my favorite topic, which is there are policy challenges that people do not consider. So in order to earn carbon credits, you have to have something called carbon rights, which is your right to sell that carbon in the first place. And unfortunately, it's not clearly defined in most laws. And so a lot of projects don't actually have the right, or they have to go contact local government officials to define who has the right to own and trade carbon. And that can be a very lengthy process. So sometimes over 5 years worth of work just working with the government, as well as there's a lot of unclear management. Mangroves, are terrestrial and oceanic. So sometimes multiple government agencies are in charge of them. And this can lead to a lot of lack of clarity on which people to get permission to restore it. And in addition to that, sometimes there are community engagement requirements. So you might have to work with the community in a certain way and abide by all existing laws and policies. And lately, some national governments have actually banned the trade of all nature-based carbon credits, which has put a halt on projects occurring in certain countries. So those are the main kind of large challenges that projects face. But as a market whole, there has been some controversy about placing a price on nature, and that instead of it just being about the carbon, it should be, more about all of the benefits that these ecosystems can provide. As well as some projects actually end up issuing too many credits, even though they haven't actually produced that much carbon reductions. And there's some research that is still lacking on these ecosystems that we need to understand better, because some organizations are really interested in expanding beyond mangrove, seagrass, and salt marsh into areas such as whale carbon, for example. And unfortunately, the science is not quite there for us to be putting them on the carbon market. So just to summarize, and before I answer or open it up to any questions that you guys have, as a summary, blue carbon projects are a way to fund conservation and restoration activities through carbon credits. And sometimes it's the only option that communities have to, do this type of work. But there are a limited number of projects currently, mostly due to the large amount of challenges that I just went through. So social, technical, political, and financing. And so in order for a project to be viable, they have to overcome all of these barriers. And, with that, I think people are starting to explore more types of blue carbon ecosystems that we can use on the voluntary carbon market, so that we can keep pushing this type of work forward that is really important, but potentially with less challenges. So with that, I think I'm going to open up a little bit early to some questions that you guys might have. In addition, please feel free to reach out to me afterwards if you have any questions. Happy to answer or hop on a call. So yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Elizabeth, for this enlightening session, and we sincerely appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So we have some hands up now. I can see Arabo Anne. Thank you. Please, let's appreciate our speaker for today. It's been an engaging and enlightening session indeed. You can use the comment section to share that. I want to see your appreciation. Let's show us some love. And yeah, this is a very wonderful session. And sharing from different perspective, real life situation. Thank you for this wonderful session, Elizabeth. All right, we'd like to have Arabo, you can ask your question, or mute your mic and ask your question. Just in 30 seconds, please.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth, for your great presentation. We really get a lot of information. My question is, what sometimes we hear the green carbon and blue carbon. What are the difference between two? Blue carbon and green carbon. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. So blue carbon is carbon stored by ocean and coastal ecosystems, so essentially by the ocean. And green carbon is carbon sequestered and stored by terrestrial plants. So forests typically is what they're referring to. So yeah, large terrestrial, not related to the marine environment in any way. Yep.
Okay, thank you for that. I can see more hands up now. All right, so we'll take the question very fast. All right, Jonathan, you can unmute your mic. Please, your question must be related to this session. If it's not related to this session, please don't ask yet. All right, Jonathan, you can unmute your mic and ask your question.
Thank you, Ma, for the knowledge. My question is, this green cat, in your presentation, you said that can be generated or protect or restoring the ecosystem system and can be sold to many companies. What is the time frame for this, Ma?
Great question. It depends. But I would say probably about 10 years or longer. I'm currently actually collecting data on existing projects to see how long they've taken. But it is a long process from the start with the community engagement portion, which can take 5 years. And then if you have other challenges like policy, that might take you another 3 years before you can actually start the project. So that's 8 years you've already spent trying to start. And then after that, you probably have about another 5+ years to go. So it just depends on the project and the situation. If you already are in a community and have permission from the government, it will take much faster. Yeah, it will be much faster. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I appreciate so much.
Okay, can we have Becca from Uganda? You can unmute your mic and ask your question, Becca.
Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth. I appreciate your presentation. I'm glad you're also into that. I'm trying to do also research on innovative solutions in the blue economy. So I want to know, because in some coastal zones, there is lack of data. And you say that if you're trying to, for example, maybe budget for carbons, maybe to sell your credits, you must have data. And I guess it's like quantitative data. So is there a way we can maybe use qualitative data, maybe from indigenous communities where they don't have maybe any research carried out? Then we base on their knowledge or what they tell us, then we compute that. Is it possible so?
So I think it kind of depends on the carbon standard that you choose, because they will each have different requirements for that side of things. One option is actually, you can use remote sensing information and data to understand what's happened at the project site. And that's mostly what people have been doing lately. At least from the conversations I've had, most people have been looking at remote sensing to track what the ecosystem was like previously.
Oh, okay. So it means there is still there is some research gap there, I think. Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, it's tricky because remote sensing for mangroves is not always very accurate, just because mangroves are on the ocean as well. There's some reflection, and it can be, depending on what type of technology you're using, maybe that remote sensing satellite didn't go up until like 3 years ago, so then you only have 3 years of data. It just is a kind of a process to figure out what is available to you and what you can use.
Okay, that's good. Appreciate.
Okay, thank you. Can we have Mohammed? Okay, we are just going to take 2 questions once, and before you respond to that, let's have Mohammed, then we have Mayowa to ask their question. Mohammed, you can unmute your mic and ask your question. Patrick, I believe you've asked your question. You can lower your hand. Hello, Mohammed. If you are there, kindly unmute your mic and ask your question. Hello, Mohammed. Yes, we can hear you speaking.
Yes, I'm talking, please. Yes. Okay. Thank you for this wonderful question, ma'am. My question goes like this. Please, what about the areas that have no presence of sea, so they are not close to sea? Are they also at this project? And then secondly, how can somebody create awareness to people on this blue economy?
Okay, all right. I hope you got that question, Elizabeth.
I did not quite. Did you pick it up?
Okay, I got a second question, that how can one get to create awareness in line to blue economy? And the very first question, Mohammed, if you can repeat your very first question. I remember I mentioned, I could hear the part of mangrove, and I couldn't hear the very first question clearly. Mohammed, if you are there, but you can also respond to his second question. But before she responds to her second question, for those of us on this call, please, the tracking and evaluation form has been shared. It's very, very important for each and every one of you to fill that form before you leave the session. And it's not meant to be shared with anybody. I mean, most especially on the WhatsApp platform. None of you on this call should please share it on the WhatsApp platform. So will you just respond to his second question now? How one can get to engage on advocacy and awareness on blue economy?
Yeah, so it's really dependent, I think, on the community. What I would generally recommend is when you first go into a community, is what you should assess is the level of knowledge and understanding that is already there within the community and the participants. So sometimes this might take the form of, going out with the fishermen and understanding what level of knowledge and understanding they have of the mangroves and why it's important for them, as well as understanding, this is very general, but, education levels. A lot of people can't read, so you have to communicate and raise awareness in more of an activity-based engagement process. So that might be by taking people out into the mangrove, doing a hands-on experience of why it's important. We are currently producing some like awareness pamphlets and materials that people could give out to communities that hopefully will be translated into many, many different languages. But I personally would recommend an approach that's really hands-on and meets, the community at where they're currently at in their understanding, and explaining and showing examples of how it can benefit them moving forward.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for that wonderful response. Can we have my video is off. Mayowa from Oyo, can you unmute your mic and speak? Mayowa. Hello, Mayowa, if you can hear me, you can kindly unmute your mic and speak.
All right. So Good evening. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, thank you very much. So I've enjoyed every bit of the session, but there's something or let me say a perception I have about carbon credits. Prior to now, I was aware of the green carbon, and of course, I had a little knowledge about the blue carbon. However, there seems to be this perception with me that can we say that carbon credits generally are not means of empowering climate crisis? Now, how do I mean? I was thinking that, okay, let's take a good look at, I've worked in Akwa Ibom before, and I've seen firsthand the impact that ExxonMobil has had on these communities. Right about today, there are so many environmental degradation impacts on that community. Is carbon credit telling us that even with all these efforts that these people are committing, once they are able to finance a project down south, maybe the Amazons or maybe somewhere else, then it gives them a liberty for all the efforts that they are committing? Because at the end of the day, the impact that they leave on the immediate communities where they function would continue to affect them tremendously. And wherever they are, funding the projects may seem not to be, earning anything. And these people continue to rot in the influence and impacts of the project. So I want you to give me some clarity in that aspect. Maybe I'm having a misperception, or probably there is a solution area that I'm not talking about.
All right. That would be our last question for today. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Okay, yeah, that's a really good question. So I personally like to think about blue carbon credits not as a solution to climate change, because when we're really understanding how much they're contributing, it is quite small in terms of reducing atmospheric emissions. But the impact that these projects can have is on the local communities. And so we should be thinking about this more as a sustainable development mechanism. So this funding, we can use this climate mitigation tactic to fund local communities to conserve and restore their ecosystems. They would not have this resource otherwise. So it's about kind of leveraging this mechanism to support local people to be in charge of their ecosystem, make decisions, and have funding available for other initiatives, like in the Makoko Pamoja project, that was, health, sanitation, clean water, that can transform multiple communities at once. So if that is kind of helpful, a way to think about it is, yes, does it help climate? Yes. But it is really more about the community and the long-term impact that it can have there.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much on behalf of the leadership of ADEV Africa. We want to appreciate you for this wonderful session. We know that blue carbon is a very big area. I mean, broad course which cannot be covered within just 2 hours, not within just a month. Yeah. But you gave us an insight, an overview of what it has to. It's just structured around. Thank you very much for this wonderful session. We sincerely appreciate the time you spent with us this evening. Please let's show us some love. I can see one of us clapping. Thank you, Patrick. I can see your hand. Let's show us some love. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And we definitely look forward to having you in our forthcoming session over and over again. And we wish you, as you enjoy the rest of your weekend, have a wonderful evening.
Thank you guys very much. My email is in the chat, so please feel free to reach out if you need anything or have any follow-up questions. So thank you guys.
Yeah, bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Dear participants, we believe it's been a wonderful time a wonderful learning time this evening. And this is Okay, before we end today's session, we just quickly like to share one or two information with us that's in line to the program timeline. The program timeline that we have on this, that's on the program guide that was shared with us. I think during the opening session, we were being informed that the community impact project will not be executed, is not part of this, or part of the activities we are going to be having for this course. So our main focus are basically on the research and advocacy. And the very first part is where we get to engage on research and also share our policy brief in our respective study track. And we were told earlier during the opening session that we're having 5 tracks. And the very first track is the people that are working on blue carbon, blue finance, maritime, environmental management, ocean energy, and ocean conservation. So each and every one are going to be assigned to a particular team. You are going to have a team which you are going to be working with, and that will be done over the weekend. I can see 45 people on this call. However, I know that we have more than that on the general community, and we have a low participation. So please, it's very important you fill in the tracking and evaluation form. It's what validates your attendance for this program. So it's not meant to be shared on the WhatsApp platform for any reason. Like I earlier mentioned, after we are done with this training, which the final training session is going to be tomorrow, we are going to be having our various groups and various research study track groups, and which they will share the name with you. And once they share the name with you, please join your specific groups. Your specific group. So if you are in the Blue Finance group, please join the specific group which you have been assigned to. And an update form is also going to be shared with us by tomorrow. It's important we get to fill our information on that update form. Yeah, it's just something you can fill within 3 minutes and you get to submit. Then after, we have the virtual advocacy series for each group, which we are going to do across. It's just getting to speak more on what our research was based on. And that will bring us to the end of the session, and that will bring us to the end of today's program. I don't know if I should take questions today or I should just take questions tomorrow. This is just 5:20. We are meant to end the session by 5:30. However, I can just take 1 or 2 questions, or we open. I would prefer we open the group. So if you have a question, please drop your question on the group so we can attend to it. And for those who are not here to also be able to benefit from the answer. But please, it's very important for you to fill the tracking and evaluation form before you leave. And once again, it's so good to have each and every one. Congratulations once again. You are on the path of making great development and contributing to sustainable development. And as we all say that we are halfway to achieving the 2030 agenda, your contribution, your action, it's going to be part of what we contribute to achieving these global goals. So please get into action. Beyond mere words, get into action. So I look forward to see our great actions, and we look forward to have you tomorrow in tomorrow's session. Same time, 4 p.m., same link. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.